I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in mechanics. I believe in springs, in gears, and in the cold precision of metal. For 12 years as an antique restorer in Seattle, I have handled over 400 music boxes of all kinds, from pocket-sized Roog ones to giant polyphon machines. Every strange sound, every groan or creak has a physical cause. A dry spring, a rusted steel leaf, or a loose screw. There is always a rational explanation, at least until last Tuesday. It all started at an estate sale in the Queen Anne neighborhood. It was a Victorian-style house, damp and reeking of old dust. Outside, the typical November rain of the Pacific Northwest was pouring down, tapping on the eaves like fingers, impatiently demanding entry. I found it nestled on a dusty oak shelf in the corner of the study, a Swiss Paillard music box, dating from about 1890. For someone in the trade like me, finding a Paillard Sublime Harmony in such original condition is like winning the lottery. The box was made of polished black walnut, intricately inlaid with mother-of-pearl roses. It was heavy, about 7 kilos, radiating the distinct smell of old varnish and beeswax. How much? I asked the estate manager, trying to keep my voice calm so as not to get overcharged. The man looked at the box, then looked at me with a strange look. Not the usual greed of dealers, but relief. $50. Just take it out of here right now. $50 for an item worth at least $3,000. By rights, the warning bells in my head should have been ringing loudly, but professional greed drowned out everything. I paid cash, wrapped it in my raincoat, and hugged it to the car as if carrying a newborn baby. Back at my basement workshop, I placed it on the technical bench under the glaring white fluorescent light. It was 8 p.m. The space was completely quiet, save for the hum of the dehumidifier in the corner. I put on white cotton gloves and began a preliminary inspection. It was absurdly perfect. Not a crack in the wood, the brass latch gleaming flawlessly. However, when I flipped the box over to check the base, I froze. Under the bottom, usually where the paper song list is glued, were deep gouges. They didn't look like scratches from being dragged across a table. They were jagged, violent, and deep into the wood grain. I narrowed my eyes. Those scratches looked like someone had tried to claw from the inside out, but that was physically impossible as the bottom was a solid piece of wood nearly 2 centimeters thick. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. Wood, shrinkage, I muttered, reassuring myself with a craftsman's logic. I put the box down, flipped the lever to stop, and decided to start dismantling it in the morning. I turned off the workshop lights, leaving the box sitting alone in the dark. Upstairs, I washed off the dust of the old house and climbed into bed at 11:30 p.m., completely unaware that it was the last peaceful night of my life. I woke up, my heart pounding in my chest as if I had just run a long distance. The room was pitch black, with only the sickly yellow streetlight casting through the gap in the window blinds. I reached for the phone on the bedside table. The screen lit up, the number 2:37 a.m. hitting my eyes. Outside, the rain had ceased, leaving behind a heavy silence, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring from trying to listen. And then I heard it. Ting, ting, ting. The sound echoed up from the basement, creeping through the vents of the heating system, echoing into my bedroom faintly, but clearly. That was the sound of the music box. My first reaction was not fear, but the annoyance of a mechanic. Damn it, I thought. The spring slipped. Sometimes in old music boxes, a worn governor can cause the mechanism to self-activate if the spring is wound too tight. I blamed myself for not unwinding the spring before going to bed. I threw off the covers and got out of bed. The wooden floor was ice cold under my bare feet. I didn't bother turning on the hallway light, using only the light from my phone screen to guide my way down the stairs to the workshop. The deeper I went, the clearer the music became. And that was when the annoyance turned into a vague sense of unease. The Paillard was noted to play the Blue Danube, a cheerful, rhythmic waltz, but the sound emitting from the darkness down there was not a waltz. It was slow, intermittent, and pathetically melancholic. The notes didn't flow, but fell drop by drop, heavy and sharp like shards of broken ice. It sounded more like a requiem than a dance. I stopped dead at the foot of the stairs. The air in the basement was significantly colder than upstairs, a damp cold that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Who's there?" I called out softly, my voice cracking from sleepiness. Of course, there was no answer, only that bizarre melody continuing to loop. I flipped the light switch. The fluorescent light flickered a few times, then blazed up, banishing the darkness. The music box still lay quietly on the workbench, exactly where I left it last night. The lid was still shut tight, but the sound was coming clearly from inside that thick walnut wood. I walked closer, swallowing hard. The music stopped the instant my finger touched the lid. The sudden silence rushed in, making my ears ache. I held my breath and slowly opened the lid. Inside, the brass mechanism lay dormant, and what made my stomach knot was not the fact that it had just played by itself. The control lever was still firmly in the stop position. Furthermore, the cylinder had stopped at the very end of the cycle, meaning it had played the whole song. I reached out and touched the metal cylinder. It was ice cold, not a hint of friction warmth from recent activity. But the most absurd thing was when I looked at the comb, the steel comb teeth. They were vibrating slightly, a residual vibration, proving they had just produced sound seconds ago. I stood there, alone in the basement at nearly 3 a.m., trying to use all my knowledge of physics to explain how a locked machine could play a melody, and why that melody sounded so much like a mournful wail. The next morning, I walked down to the workshop with a cup of strong black coffee in my hands and a head full of rational explanations. Morning sunlight streamed through the basement window, illuminating dust motes suspended in the air, making last night's fear seem truly silly. Auditory hallucination, I told myself as I set the coffee cup on the table. Excessive fatigue combined with the sound of wind drafting through the vents. That was what I wanted to believe. I needed to believe. It was 8:15 a.m. I decided to perform a comprehensive surgery on the Paylard. I wanted to prove that this machine was just a soulless assembly of brass and steel, nothing more, nothing less. I took out the precision screwdriver set and began removing the 3 screws, securing the mechanism to the wooden case. The heavy mechanism left the box, revealing the rough wood inside. I placed the mechanism on a specialized stand, clamped a watchmaker's loop to my right eye, and leaned in close to inspect the cylinder. Basically, a music box works like an automatic piano. The cylinder has thousands of tiny pins. When the cylinder rotates, these pins pluck the teeth of the steel comb to create musical notes. I gently rotated the mechanism to check the condition of the pins. The coffee cup in my hand fell to the floor, shattering. Hot coffee splashed onto my trouser legs, but I didn't even feel the heat. I stood frozen, my eyes glued to the loop lens. The 13-inch brass cylinder was polished smooth. Completely smooth. No pins. Not a single pin, where there should have been thousands of tiny metal pins sticking out like porcupine quills. To play the Blue Danube, the brass surface was ground smooth. The grind marks were very subtle, regular, as if someone had used the finest sandpaper to completely erase its ability to produce sound. I tremblingly ran my index finger along the length of the cylinder. It was slippery, cold, and emotionless, like a bullet casing. Physically, mechanically, and acoustically, this machine could not produce any music. Even if the spring turned, even if the cylinder moved, it would only spin in absolute silence because there was nothing to pluck the comb. Then where did the sound from last night come from? The melancholic, intermittent music I heard clearly. The vibration of the comb I felt under my fingertips. What was it all? I picked up the yellowed label paper that fell from the bottom of the wooden box. The faded purple handwriting clearly read, Blue Danube, Waltz. But right below, there was another line, written in graphite pencil, so faint I had to tilt the paper under the light to read it. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. It doesn't sing the song in the box, it sings the song in the head. The air in the workshop suddenly became stifling. The fragrant coffee smell was now overpowered by a strong metallic stench, like rust mixed with dried blood. I looked back at the empty box on the table. For the first time in my career, I felt I wasn't looking at an antique, but at a trap that had sprung. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I reassembled the mechanism back into the wooden case. It was an act both stupid and necessary. I needed to recreate the scene. Needed to see its mechanism in action the moment it made a sound. I placed the box on the dining table in the middle of the living room, the most open space. I locked the lid latch carefully, even applying a layer of sealing tape across the gap between the lid and the body. I sat opposite it, about 2 meters away, gripping a heavy maglite flashlight. The wall clock ticked steadily, each tick-tock like a hammer blow to my nerves, stretched tight as guitar strings. 2 a.m. Nothing. 2:30 a.m. Still silent. At 2:44 a.m., the temperature in the room suddenly dropped. I know this sounds cliché in ghost stories, but it is a physical fact. I could feel the cold seeping through my thick hoodie, soaking into my flesh as if someone had just opened a freezer door. My breath began to turn into thin smoke, and then the tape began to peel. It didn't peel because the glue failed. It was being stretched. I heard the slow, painful rip of plastic being stretched to its limit. The brass latch groaned with an ear-piercing shriek. The force from within was so strong, I saw the wooden lid bow and tremble. Clack! The latch sprang open. The lid slowly lifted, not springing open by spring power, but lifting cautiously, deliberately, like an invisible hand pushing it from beneath. I wanted to run. Every survival instinct in my lizard brain screamed, "Run!" But my body was paralyzed. My feet felt nailed to the floor. I could only stare blankly into the pitch-black darkness inside the newly opened box. The music started again, but this time it was different. Last night, it sounded like metal striking comb teeth, cold, sharp. Tonight, knowing for sure the cylinder was ground flat, the sound changed to mock my understanding. It was a humming sound. It came from inside the box, but the timbre was not mechanical. It was the voice of something organic. It sounded wet, raspy, yet trying to mimic the pitch and rhythm of a music box. It staccatoed each note rigidly. Hum. Hum. Imagine a person with severed vocal cords trying to sing a waltz through a metal pipe. That was exactly the sound I was hearing. It was getting louder. Not echoing in the room, but as if the sound source was moving closer to me, even though the box remained still on the table. I bit my lips so hard it bled to keep from screaming. The metallic smell of blood mixed with the strong scent of rust rising from the box. In the dim light cast from the street lamp, I saw something inside the box reflecting the light. That smooth cylinder was spinning. It was spinning wildly, 10 times faster than normal speed, creating a blur of illusion. And that humming sound, it began to skip a beat, becoming distorted like a giggle strangled underwater. Extreme fear usually takes two forms, flight or paralysis. But after the paralysis passed, for a rationalist like me, it transformed into a frantic obsession with finding proof. I needed to know if I was going mad or not. The third night, I prepared myself as if going into battle. I didn't wait in the living room anymore. I took the box back down to the basement workshop, placing it inside the small soundproof room I used to check clock motor noise. I placed next to it the specialized Zoom H4n Pro recorder I used to send audio samples to clients. Recording mode, set to highest sensitivity, 24-bit, 96 kHz wave format. Nothing could escape. I locked the soundproof room door, sat outside, and monitored through the double-pane glass window. Exactly 2:37 a.m. The volume indicator on the recorder screen, connected via cable to the outside, suddenly spiked vertical. The box, through the thick glass, looked perfectly still. I heard nothing from the outside, but the machine's electronic ears were catching a storm of sound inside it. The red signal light flashed continuously like a frantic warning. Peak, peak, peak. It lasted exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds, the standard length of a waltz. Then, silence. The next morning, under the safe sunlight, I finally dared to plug the memory card into the computer to analyze the audio file. I put on noise-canceling headphones, my hand trembling as I pressed play. What I heard was not music. At normal frequency, the distorted humming, from last night was still there. It sounded distant, echoing like singing in a bathroom. But when I isolated the low-frequency bass and amplified it, my blood ran cold. Hidden beneath that humming was the sound of breathing. Labored, wet, raspy. It sounded like the wheezing breath of someone with severe pneumonia, waterlogged lungs, trying to gasp for air right against the microphone diaphragm. Kuh, 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 kuh. But that wasn't the worst part. At 45 seconds, another sound cut in. Scritch, scritch. I rewound and looped that section, filtering out background noise. The sound was sharp, hard, and dry. It was fingernails. Someone, or something, was scratching the inside of the wood. Not scratching to escape, but scratching to a rhythm. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. It was tapping a waltz beat with fingernails on the wooden walls of the sealed box. I yanked the headphones off and threw them on the table. Nausea rushed to my throat. I stared blankly at the audio waveform on the computer screen. The sharp wave peaks looked like saw teeth, and at the very end of the recording file, right before the silence returned, the audio waveform didn't fade out but bulged out slightly. I summoned all my courage to put the headphones back on, skipping to the last second. Between the wet breathing and the scratching, there was a whispering voice, very faint, but so clear I could feel the heat blowing into my ear. "Open it. It hurts." The curiosity of a craftsman had died, giving way to the fear of prey. I needed to know where this hellish thing came from. The next morning, I called Mr. Henderson, the estate sale manager. The phone rang 6 times before he finally picked up, his tone somewhat irritable, but quickly shifting to worry when I mentioned the Payard music box. "Listen, you already bought it," he said quickly, as if afraid I'd ask for a refund. "Policy says no returns." "I don't want to return it," I lied, my hand gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. "I just need to know about the previous owner. Is there anything wrong with this box?" Technically speaking, the other end of the line was silent for a long time. I could hear him dragging on a cigarette through the phone. "Mrs. Agnes," he finally said, his voice lowered. "She lived alone in that house for 40 years. She wasn't deaf, but for the last 10 years of her life, she always wore earplugs, the heavy-duty industrial kind. Why? She said the house was noisy. But as you saw, that area is quiet as a sheet, nothing but the sound of rain." Mr. Henderson hesitated a moment, then continued, his voice trembling. "When the police found her, she was sitting in her armchair, that music box on her lap. She died of heart failure, but what?" I pressed. "She had taken the earplugs out, and her fingers were crushed. Dried blood was all over the lid. Police said she was trying to hold the lid down to keep it from opening." My stomach nodded. The image of the scratches on the bottom of the box flashed in my mind. It wasn't someone scratching from the inside out. It was Agnes. She was desperately trying to keep it closed. "One more thing." Henderson's voice became faint, full of guilt. I shouldn't say this, but in her will, she left a codicil. She requested to have the box buried with her. In the grave. 6 feet under. "Then why did you sell it?" I screamed, unable to control the anger mixed with horror. "That was the demand of the heirs," he snapped back to hide his fear. "They said it was a valuable antique. Burying it would be a waste. They wanted the money. I was just doing my job." He hung up abruptly. I sat, dazed, staring at the music box, trapped in the soundproof room through the glass. Now I understood. Agnes didn't own it. She was the warden. She spent the rest of her life guarding this thing, sacrificing her hearing and her sanity to ensure it didn't sing. And her greedy descendants, along with my stupid curiosity, had broken that one rule. I took out the blue Danube note to look at it again. In the daylight, I noticed a detail I'd missed before because the writing was too faint. Next to the warning, it sings, the song in the head was a scrawled date, the 11th of December, 1892. That was not the production date. I looked it up quickly online. It was the date of a major fire at the Payard factory in Sainte Croix, Switzerland. 12 craftsmen burned to death in the timber warehouse. The cause of the fire was never determined, but an old report recorded the testimony of the sole survivor. They couldn't find the exit because of the smoke, but they didn't scream either. They just stood there and listened. I shivered. This box didn't contain music. It contained what remained of that day, and I had just invited it into my home. I decided to kill it. I couldn't bury it in the ground as Mrs. Agnes wanted. I didn't have land, and to be honest, I didn't believe earth and stone could hold this thing. I am a mechanic. If it's a machine, I can take it apart. If I separate every gear, every screw, turn it into a pile of lifeless scrap, then it can't function anymore. That was my logic, a deadly mistaken logic. At 10 p.m., I took the box out of the soundproof room. I placed it on the workbench, turning on all the workshop lights to the brightest level. I wanted everything clear, transparent. No shadows, no hallucinations. I worked with cold ruthlessness. Using a 2mm flathead screwdriver, I removed the 3 large screws securing the bed plate to the wooden case. I lifted the entire heavy brass motor block out, placing it on another table 3 meters away. Next, I removed that smooth cylinder from the bed plate. I removed the comb as well. Now, on my workbench remained only the hollow walnut wooden shell. It lay there, mouth gaping wide like a dried corpse. Empty inside, only the smell of rotting wood and the faded crimson velvet lining remaining. "Done," I whispered, wiping sweat from my forehead. I felt a false sense of relief creeping in. I had separated the soul sound from the body shell. I turned my back to pack up the tools. And then, the sound rang out. Not the ting, not thun of metal anymore. There was no metal to clash. This time, the sound emitted directly from that empty wooden shell. But it didn't travel through the air. I felt it in my teeth first. A low, aching vibration spreading from my jaw to my skull. I spun around. The box still lay motionless, but the air around it was twisting. Dust in the air didn't fall, but swirled around the box's mouth, as if sucked into a tiny invisible tornado. The humming grew louder, thickening. It sounded like wind whistling through a narrow crack, but carrying moisture. I clamped my hands over my ears. Useless. That sound didn't enter from the outside. It was resonating with my skull. It rang from inside my head. Only then did I realize my terrible mistake. The pins on the cylinder weren't worn down. They were intentionally removed. The metal mechanism, the comb, the cylinder, and they weren't what created the sound. They were the cage. They were iron bars designed to imprison, to filter, to minimize the true sound lurking inside that wood. By removing the mechanism, I hadn't disarmed it. I had unlocked the prison cell. The humming turned into a continuous, high-pitched wail, like tinnitus, but amplified 1,000 times. My eyes began to blur. Hot noseblood gushed out, dripping onto the cold concrete floor. From within the empty box, darkness seemed to well up, bubbling like boiling tar. The sound in my head began to change. The piercing shriek subsided, but was replaced by a fake silence, crackling like a stylus running on the groove of an old vinyl record. Then I heard a clicking sound. It was the sound of metal striking wood, crystal clear, exactly the sound of me setting the screwdriver down on the table 5 minutes ago. I stood, rooted to the spot, noseblood still trickling down to my salty lips. My mind spun, trying to distinguish between reality and the sound echoing from the box. "Done." The voice rang out. It was my voice, but it didn't come from my mouth. It resonated from the pitch-black hole inside that hollow wooden box. It repeated, like a cruel parrot learning to speak. "Done. Done. Do. Nay." Each time it repeated, the tone distorted a little more. The first time sounded like me. The second time sounded deeper. The third time, it sounded wet, as if my throat were submerged in swamp mud. It was replaying my recent past. It was eating the sound of my presence. I backed away, bumping into the work chair. Clack. 5 seconds later, a similar clack emitted from the box, but louder, harder, sounding more like a breaking bone than a chair bump. I realized it wasn't just mimicking, it was editing. More horrifying were the things I hadn't heard earlier. In the ghostly recording, the box was playing back. Mixed with my panting while dismantling the machine, I heard footsteps. Thud, thud, thud. In my memory of 5 minutes ago, I was completely alone. But according to what the box was playing, something had been walking around me while I was bent over working. Bare, heavy, sticky footsteps, circling the workbench, stopping right behind my back when I said done, and giggled. I had never heard that laugh earlier, but now it was echoing in my skull, clear and cruel. I covered my ears tight, screaming, "Shut up!" The box went silent. A silence lasting about 10 seconds. Long enough for me to think I had won, or had gone completely mad. Then, a whispering voice resonated from the box. Not the distorted voice from before. This time, it mimicked my voice perfectly, precise in every intonation, every vibration of the vocal cords. It repeated the sentence I just screamed, but not with anger, but with extreme amusement. "Shut up." And then it continued, speaking words I had never said. It used my voice to speak the darkest thoughts kindling in my head right now. "You can't escape. You already opened the door. You invited me into your head. Now I will use this mouth." I felt my lips twitching. Not controlled by me. My jaw muscles spasmed automatically. My tongue curled. I was lip-syncing to the words emitting from the box. It was taking control. I grabbed the 5-kilogram sledgehammer at the corner of the table. Fear had turned into the frenzy of survival instinct. If I didn't smash it right now, I would become a living speaker for it. I let out an animalistic roar, channeling all the strength of despair into my right arm. The 5-kilogram sledgehammer tore through the air. The target was the center of the pitch-black abyss of the pillared wooden box. Thud. It should have been the piercing crack of wood splintering. There should have been wood shards flying across the room. But no, the sound produced was like when you hit a soaking wet bag of rotting meat with a stick. Wet, murky, and suffocating. The hammerhead didn't bounce. It sank deep into the lid. I stared down blankly, my eyes wide open, but my brain refusing to process the image before me. The rock-hard walnut wood now softened, pulsating like necrotic flesh. From the indentation where the hammerhead was stuck, a pitch-black, viscous liquid began to ooze out. It didn't flow fast like water, but gushed out in spurts, gurgling, like blood from a severed arterial wound, but thick as tar. And the smell. My God, that smell. It hit my nose directly, making me vomit uncontrollably on the spot. It wasn't just the smell of sewers. It was the smell of stagnant water in a flower vase forgotten for months, mixed with the smell of burning hair and the pungent scent of formaldehyde-preserving mummies. What the? I stammered, trying to pull the hammer out, but it was stuck tight. The box seemed to have muscles, contracting to swallow the hammerhead. Then I saw that black liquid did not follow gravity. Instead of flowing down, it started spreading up the hammer handle, crawling toward my hand like sticky tentacles. The room temperature free-falled. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling began to flicker frantically, then popped with a snap, dying out. Darkness descended, leaving only the faint blue light from the computer screen. In that cadaverous light, I saw my breath turn into thick white clouds. Frost began to freeze on the hammer handle, bone-chilling through the gloves. I let go, backed away, and slipped, falling into a clatter of metal tools. The music box, now a black leaking mass, began to vibrate violently on the table. The humming. Returned, but this time it no longer tried to mimic a waltz melody. It growled, an infrasound that made my chest ache, and my teeth loosen in their gums. From within that black quagmire, something was slowly rising. It was a finger. A long, pale, nail-less finger, with twisted, structurally incorrect joints, hooking onto the wooden edge, trying to pull something much larger from inside that tiny box, out into this world. I tried to scream, but my throat was choked bitter, as if someone had stuffed it full of cotton. I could only emit meaningless gurgles while crawling backward, heels kicking wildly against the floor, trying to create distance from the monstrosity perched on my workbench. That pale hand had risen to the wrist. It gripped the edge of the wooden box, which was now deformed and blistered like a giant burn, to use as leverage. Crack. Crack. The sound of brittle bones breaking rang out every time it moved, as if it were having to break its own bones to fit through the narrow box opening. That pitch-black liquid continued to spill over the table edge, dripping onto the floor right next to where I lay. It spread out, forming a jet-black puddle, still and glossy as a mirror, under the sickly blue light from the computer screen. In my panic, my gaze accidentally fell into that black puddle, and my heart stopped beating. Reflected in the black water was not my pale with fear face, nor was it the ceiling with the shattered light bulbs. Looking back at me from the bottom of that pitch-black puddle was a face. It pressed close to the liquid surface, as if looking through a glass window. Its face skin was stark white, pale as the belly of a dead fish bloated underwater for days. But most horrifying were the eyes. It had no eyes. Or rather, its eyelids had been pulled down and sewn shut. I clearly saw every stitch. Not just cloth or thread. Those stitches were made of copper wire. The thin copper wire used in electric motor inductors. The wires pierced through the soft flesh of the eyelids, rusted and stained with dried blood, sealing its vision forever. It was blind, but it was looking at me. I felt that gaze piercing through flesh, spiraling deep into the spinal cord. Suddenly, the mouth in the reflection split open, a smile reaching from ear to ear, revealing pitch-black teeth as jagged as rusted nails. And from that mouth, not from the box on the table, the waltz melody rang out. At the same time, on the workbench, that pale hand let go of the box edge. It elongated absurdly, like stretched rubber, and pointed directly at my face. In my head, a distant but crystal clear voice rang out, overpowering all thoughts. Eyes for ears. You have heard me. Now I need to see you. I saw the black shadow beneath the puddle start to rise. The liquid surface stretched like a thin membrane about to burst. That face with eyes sewn with copper wire was trying to crawl out of the floor to get to me. Survival instinct flared up more intensely than ever. When that pale face was only millimeters away from the surface of the black puddle, I grabbed a 10-inch wood chisel on the shelf right at hand and stabbed straight down at the floor. Thud. The chisel didn't hit concrete. It sank into something soft, tough, and elastic. A scream rang out, but not through the ears. It exploded in my brain like a massive shockwave, sending me reeling back, my head slamming hard into a steel cabinet. In a second of daze, I saw that pale shadow retreat back into the black puddle. Without hesitation, I scrambled up, using all my strength to dash toward the basement's only exit. I ran. I ran like a madman. I didn't have time to get my wallet, no time to put on shoes. My bare feet stepped on shattered glass shards from the fluorescent bulbs. But that pain was nothing compared to the cold current chasing my heels. I dashed outside, climbing into my old truck. My hands were shaking so much, it took 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I floored the gas, leaving the house and the monstrosity in the basement behind. Seattle, at 4 a.m., was buried in a thick blanket of fog. I drove aimlessly on the I-5 highway, eyes never leaving the rearview mirror, fearing that I would see a pale hand reaching out from the back seat. I decided to turn on the radio to drown out the deadly silence in the car. I needed a normal sound, a human voice, pop music, anything belonging to this world. I turned the radio knob. Static. Static. The radio waves were heavily jammed. I switched to a news station, then a classical station. Ting. 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 I froze. The brake pedal slammed, causing the car to skid across the slippery road surface. That melody. The Blue Danube Waltz rang out again from the 4 speakers around my car. It was no longer a hum. It had returned to being mechanical, the sound of metal pins plucking steel comb teeth. But each musical note now sounded like a nail being driven into a coffin. I turned the volume knob all the way down. The music was still playing. I pressed the radio power button. The screen went dead. The music was still playing. I frantically ripped the radio power cord right out of the dashboard, exposing a tangled mess of wires. But that melancholic waltz melody continued to ring out, steadily, rhythmically, as if the iron frame of the car itself were vibrating to produce it. And then, I realized the most horrible thing. The sound was not coming from the speakers. It was coming from inside my right eardrum. A hot sensation flowed down my neck. I reached up to wipe it. Blood. My right ear was bleeding uncontrollably. I am writing these lines in a cheap motel in a small town in Idaho, more than 600 kilometers from Seattle. I abandoned the truck on the side of the highway after I couldn't stand it becoming a giant mobile music box anymore. I walked, caught a bus, and hid like a criminal. But you cannot run away from the sound that lies right inside your head. My right ear is completely deaf. Doctors at a charity clinic said my eardrum was shredded by a massive acoustic shock from within. They couldn't explain why there were tiny bits of rusted copper wire in my ear canal. The point is, though I can no longer hear the sounds of the outside world with my right ear, I still hear I-T. That melody. It never stops. Even now, as I type these lines, the waltz is still playing. It's slower, stretching out like a rubber band about to snap. Each note that sounds means a sharp pain to the brain, as if someone were driving a sewing needle into my mind. I have begun to see the signs. This morning, while looking in the bathroom mirror to wash my face, I saw a long scratch under my neck. It wasn't a skin wound, it was a faint line, a series of tiny, evenly spaced holes running along my lower eyelid. It's preparing for the next step. Eyes for ears. It has captured my hearing, and now it's starting to sew my vision shut. Never buy things with a history you don't clearly understand. Never think your curiosity is harmless. Some things are created not for entertainment, but to imprison pains that cannot dissipate. That Payard music box was not an antique. It was a cocoon, and I helped the thing inside. It molted. If you are reading these lines, listen to me. If you hear music where there is no source, if you see a wooden box with strange scratches on the bottom, don't look at it, don't touch it, and most importantly, never let it hear your voice. Because once it knows your melody, it will play that song until you are no longer yourself. The music. It just sped up a bit. I can hear fingernails tapping the rhythm on the wooden table right behind my back. I don't dare look back. I know the reflection in the window is no longer me. It is holding a copper wire. And it is smiling.